Hello, welcome back to TSC Talks, the podcast inspired by the condition known as tuberous sclerosis complex. My name's Jill Woodworth, and I am your host. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed our last guest, Stacy Jackson, giving us an update on her daughter's out-of-district placement and making the transition to adulthood in the special education arena. Up next is Nurse Janna Champagne. She is a BSN, RN, and cannabis nurse. She got into the cannabis industry when she personally experienced a health collapse. In 2012, she credits cannabis for helping to reduce her reliance on harmful pharmaceuticals and supporting her ability to regain optimal health. She's also known for her daughter's cannabis autism story, which we're going to dig into quite a bit. So I'm going to quote her here. I've worked with thousands of patients directly. It's commonplace for patients to reduce their reliance on pharmaceuticals once they start cannabis therapy and really improve their quality of life. In the elderly population, I've seen reversals of dementia. In the autism population, improved behavior, improved quality of life, and improved function. Wow, that's huge because that has ripple effects throughout the entire society. You're going to love this one. I'm going to stop talking about Janna. I do want to share a few things that are coming up. We've got Russell Cole of Organic Growth Solutions here to talk about his work in the industry, utilizing drone technology and light waves to assess the health of cannabis plants and the potential that process has for growers, reducing costs and labor. So that's really interesting as well. We have another cannabis nurse, Marissa Frattoni, to come on and talk to us about her experience locally in Massachusetts in the cannabis industry. And the Canna Moms from the Canna Mom Show are going to come on to talk about their podcast, getting that started, and their venture into the cannabis industry, sharing other people's success stories, overcoming odds, stigma, etc. Thanks for tuning in. I'm going to stop talking. Take it away, Janna.
Janna, thanks for being on the podcast.
Well,
tell me a little bit about yourself and, give me a little bio leading up to starting your integrated holistic care. Is that your main business?
It's one of the main
One of them.
Yes.
Busy lady.
So my name is Janna Champagne and I'm a cannabis nurse. And as you might imagine, I get a variety of responses to that statement. Some good, some not so good. But really the reason I'm doing this work, it's truly a life calling. Mm-hmm. The reason I stumbled onto cannabis as a nurse was when I suffered my own health failure back in 2012.
Okay.
And mainstream medicine did not have a lot to offer my condition. It was autoimmune, immune system collapse, very, very complicated. I was extremely sick for years, non-functional, bedbound for part of it.
Oh.
And I thought cannabis therapy as an alternative to opioid pain medications.
Okay.
And as a nurse, I had seen patients take that path and I had seen the end result of that, and it's really not pretty. For those that are not in the medical industry, we get patients in the hospital that they've been taking opioids so long that their gut stops moving and they have to eliminate through tubes that are surgically implanted in their gut. Another extreme case I saw was a patient who was either awake in screaming pain or completely sedated and nothing in between. And so there's just really quality of life aspect with opioid, especially with long-term use. It's really dismal. Mm-hmm. So I was very motivated and, my husband talked me into contacting a friend of ours who was a grower, and he made me some medicine. And not only did cannabis spare me that opioid path that I was trying to avoid, but within just a very few months, I was weaning off of antibiotics, which I had been, really reliant upon to continue functioning, even minimally, for about a year and a half.
Wow.
Because of chronic infections. And so I was able to wean off of the antibiotics. I was able to repair my gut. I regained the 20 pounds I had lost through that process of getting ill. And to give it some perspective, I'm 5'8" and I was down to 113 pounds. I was size 0, skin and bones, no boobs, no butt, very, very ill. And so it really gave me my health back. It gave me my brain back. I had such severe brain fog, I could barely function. I couldn't write anymore, which has always been a passion. And so it saved my life in so many ways. And then a few years later, my daughter, who is challenged with autism, went into a puberty crisis. And
okay, tell me what that means. I know
so
what you're talking about, just for anybody listening. Yeah.
Right, of course. So puberty crisis is common to about 50% of kids with autism.
Okay.
And oftentimes they go from being these sweet, cuddly, well, my daughter was sweet and cuddly and very eager to please and very happy child, to the puberty monster where she was suddenly very aggressive and she was beating up her caregivers and her parents, and she was kicking and punching holes in our walls. She even kicked a hole in the bottom panel of her door. We called it her window out of her room, so we couldn't do things like enforce timeouts. It was a very challenging time. And, in retrospect, what I believe is that behavior is communication. And she was trying to communicate to us that she was having some severe PMS symptoms. She was having a lot of pain, a lot of anxiety. And so we started the cannabis therapy for her, and it spared her out-of-home placement. At the time this was all happening, I was still recovering from my illness. I was still pretty sick, and we were crisis levels, and out-of-home placement was almost mandated for safety reasons.
I will say I had to go that route. So
it happens.
Yeah, and it's not unsalvageable, but I feel ya. So yeah.
Yeah.
So
well, it's
you
just
avoided it.
It just adds to the trauma for everybody involved. And there's no judgment. I understand why parents come to that decision.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And as a homeschooling mom, that was just something I had never considered.
Well, I didn't think of it either. I was like, I had no clue until we were getting farther along and she was getting closer to, that cliff.
Yes. So it's so difficult, and it's hard to even explain to people that experience and all that it entails. It's just traumatic on so many levels. You're getting beat up, so it's physically traumatic. Your house is destroyed, so it's financially traumatic. Your child is suffering. As a parent, you would do anything to take on their pain. Yes. And so, cannabis, this is the reason I am so passionate about cannabis as medicine, is because it has had such a huge impact in my own life. And once I began improving my own health, and I just felt this drive to utilize what I had learned through these experiences to help other people. And it really has given those experiences purpose. And so I'm just so thankful. I love my work.
That is so awesome. And, I teared up a little when I was listening to you talk about, how just the profound impact that cannabis has had on you personally. Yeah, just what you just said. Because my path is very similar. However, I'm not right. I've improved my own physical and mental health through cannabis use, but I'm doing what I'm doing to potentially help other parents that have kids with tuberous sclerosis. I'm to, learn about it and use on their kids. I want to use it on my own. I want to learn about it. Like I said, Massachusetts, we're kind of new to this. I'm new to it. So when I found you and read a little bit, I was like, oh, I'm just like, it's very validating, Janna. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. It's interesting. Do you know Alex Eccles? Have you heard his story?
No, I haven't. I'm not going to pretend.
So I'm in Oregon, and his parents are also here in Oregon. Okay. And when my daughter was in the early intervention program for autism in preschool, one of her classmates was Alex Eccles, and she and Alex rode the bus together. And so his mom and I connected on that level. Mm-hmm. And of course, at some point they left the area, so we sort of lost contact. But I read a few years after they left that he had gone into a crisis. He had stopped sleeping, and his family began using cannabis for him. Uh-huh. And my daughter at that point was still several years away from puberty crisis. And at the time I thought, well, that's interesting, but had never ever considered it for her. And so, and he also has the TSC and autism.
He does. Okay, then.
Yes. Okay. So that's where that link is.
Okay, cool. With that. No, that's okay. Now, my ears lit up when I heard that. Yeah. I'll have to make that connection. Yeah, that's interesting. So he was using it.
And they have a website. They're very open. I'm not saying anything they don't have on their website. It's Help Alex, or you could look up Alex Eccles, Echols, if you're interested in.
Absolutely, I am.
Looking at their story. And they're big advocates for cannabis as well. It's helped him enormously. He went from having to wear a helmet to being able to be without one due to self-injury.
Wow.
So it just, really heartbreaking story, but they have found some relief.
That's good.
I could certainly connect. I'm still connected with Karen, through Facebook and different things. So I'd be happy to connect you if you'd like to.
So when did you get into nursing? Was that prior to getting really sick? Did you have a nursing degree? And then come back at it with cannabis, or what was your process for, going through your education?
Yeah, I have a bachelor's degree, and at the time that I got sick, I had been working in acute care nursing for several years.
Okay.
Orthopedics, neurology, post-surgery, and also critical care nursing. I was working in a cath lab recovery unit, so I was pulling arterial lines and pushing propofol and doing conscious sedation, pretty high-level nursing.
Mm-hmm.
I was also working on my master's degree to become a nurse practitioner, and
Okay.
that's when my health failed. It happened pretty abruptly. And in retrospect, I was doing too much. I was working full time, going to graduate school full time, and homeschooling my daughter with autism as her primary caregiver. So, I was ignoring my body's red flags and
as we do as women.
Yeah, we do. And as nurses too, we're taught to put others before ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And codependency is extremely common in the nursing profession. So I was just, popping Advil with breakfast, lunch, and dinner, which, one of my diagnoses when I crashed was kidney failure. And I believe that was from the profound Advil use. It was too much.
Wow. Yeah.
So in retrospect, there were a lot of things I was doing incorrectly, but it led me to this path I feel like I was meant to be on. So, I feel like these 180s that life throws us sometimes, they're just adjusting us to the path that we're meant to follow.
So true.
Even though it's traumatic at the time. And it feels like your life is ending, but I feel like there's blessing or purpose in every adversity.
I'm right there with you. And I've had some crazy, tragic experiences that I feel like cannabis in a lot of ways has helped me get the, a lot of insight and make some connections and process a lot of trauma and, kind of be able to, like you do, frame it and say, okay, well, that's why this happened. So I can be here doing this and whatnot. So I get it.
Yeah. And people often ask me, would you go back and change what happened to your daughter? Because I do feel like it was something that was avoidable for her.
Okay.
And my answer to that is I don't think I would change it for me. I mean, she's made me a better, stronger, a stronger advocate and just a better person overall. But I would change it for her. I feel like she has suffered so much more than anybody else, in her vicinity. So that's my answer to that. If I wouldn't change it for me, I would change it for her. But, we both learned so much, and these kids are just wise little souls that are trying to tell us that there's something wrong with our standard
dysregulation
processes.
Yes. Yeah. Now, just to sidestep a little bit. So when was your daughter diagnosed with autism? I work for a startup project developing long-term permanent residences for adults with IDD and autism. So
yes.
So I'm just interested in this part of it too. So I hope you don't mind just asking.
No.
So when was she diagnosed?
Yeah, that was a long time ago. She's 17 now.
Okay.
And she was diagnosed in 2004 at 2.5 after suffering a really substantial sudden regression at 19 months.
Really?
So it took almost a year to get her diagnosis. And it was due to just her pediatrician not understanding the signs, kind of blowing off the signs she was showing, which is very common. And so parents are left to sort of figure it out on their own. And I eventually took her to the local school district, and she got the educational diagnosis at 2.5. And,
that's important.
As a nurse mom, we immediately jumped into biomed, and, thankfully I had a friend who had a friend with a kid with autism, and she connected us. So I learned about things like the gluten-free diet and started researching, even though my doctor said, do not Google this. You will not find good answers. It's a bunch of scary stuff. I was actually discouraged from researching. And so I was very fortunate to connect with other parents. And I feel like that's what we do in the autism community. It's other parents that are throwing those life preservers.
Right. There's no guidebook. There's no, anybody that's gone before and written anything down, because we're all in the middle of crisis all the time, putting out brush fires. So.
Exactly. Yeah. And what I've seen too is parents, as they come out of crises and they have their child managed, or their child comes into adulthood and they're not as overwhelmed with the primary caregiving, then you see them turn around and start advocating and helping parents that are still struggling. And so I'm just paying it forward for those that helped me.
That's awesome. So as far as her, autism was you've got the help she needed pretty early on. So it was mostly the puberty crisis where things kind of blew up in terms of not, the manageability and fears of out of home placement.
Right. As far as the behaviors, I mean, I've always been very focused on quality of life. As a nurse, I understand the procedures pretty thoroughly, as far as putting a child under general anesthesia to do an MRI when you don't, it's really not going to give you any tools. Usually it might give you some answers, but it doesn't really give you any path to help improve their situation. So I was very conservative that way and really focused on her quality of life.
So you didn't
PTSD.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
I hear something you're saying and I don't want to miss it. So you didn't go and dig like, a lot of genetic testing or trying to, I know with TSC, we have that, the one gift that we get is we have a diagnosis. We know kind of what to do with the medical piece. It gets really complicated as they get older. And, I think that's what I'm kind of at is like all the pharmaceuticals is my main issue right now. And I know you know about that. But so you just focused on but quality of life and moving forward and seeking out the best and the most progressive types of treatments, it sounds like.
Yes, her quality of life was my priority. And as such, we really, I exhausted biomedical treatments for autism. We've tried just about every supplement and diet, and different interventions to help her. Just nothing super invasive. She had fight or flight PTSD to even going to the doctor's office. So sticking her with needles, was something I just didn't feel like we should do unless there was no other option. Of course, she did get sick once and ended up in the ER with a horrible strep infection. They thought it was meningitis. And, at that point, she's like, go ahead, start an IV. I don't even care. Yeah. So I knew that when she really needed it, we could do it. But when it was a voluntary and she went in for a blood draw, it took 5 adults to hold her down. I think she was 6 or 7.
Oh, my goodness.
And she was still moving so much, they kept having to readjust the needle. And
that was my son.
Somebody literally had to be holding her jaw so she wouldn't bite anybody. I mean, and I just thought, we're not doing this again unless it's an emergency. Yeah. I'm not going to put her through this again.
Yeah.
So it's really,
I hear you.
But we did exhaust biomed, for about a decade.
Okay. What's biomed? I don't even know what that means. And that's probably terrible, but.
No, it's okay. So there's a really predominant theory that the underlying causes of autism are physical imbalances in the body.
Okay, yeah.
And I agree with it wholeheartedly. I believe autism is dysfunction in the triad of the gut, the brain, and the immune system, and the interactions between them. Okay. And this is where mainstream medicine is really failing to address autism because it's not looking at that. It's viewing it like many of the mental health disorders where they have these symptoms. We're going to label them autism. And there's nothing we can do.
Put it in the box.
Or we can try the mental health pharmaceuticals, but beyond that, they don't look at how do you heal the gut? How do you rebalance the probiotics in the gut? How do you improve the immune system response? How do you,
like a holistic.
What's happening with the neurotransmitters and that gut-brain connection? They don't look into that, which I think are all big factors with autism. And so when I didn't really look into the genetics until I got sick. And then I realized the huge impact of, just MTHFR mutation was where I started.
What's that?
Methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase. It's lacking an enzyme production in your body that breaks down folate. And so when you understand the importance of folate for brain health, it's a huge piece. You end up depleted in glutathione, and you end up unable to cleanse toxins effectively. So MTHFR mutation is actually common, they think, in 70 to 80% of kids with autism. It's a huge contributor to that injury that causes the autism initially.
So it turns something on that in the, genetic sense, turn a switch or something with having that deficiency.
Yes. But the nice thing is that when we identify it, there's some really simple supplementation that can be started to decrease the impact of that mutation.
Okay.
And these are, this is a $12 for 60-day supply type of supplement that you can get at pretty much any natural food store. So there are ways to help improve that. And then I started delving deeper and looking at, more than a dozen different pathways genetically in the body that seem to contribute not just to autism, but to systemic inflammation, which is probably the biggest factor in most chronic illnesses. So I've kind of expanded that knowledge as well, but I didn't really get into that until I got sick and started looking at these things and going, well, if I have it, my daughter probably has it. And so it was just kind of a natural progression and trying to find answers for my daughter and myself elucidated these answers that can apply to so many different illnesses.
Yeah. I mean, I know little bits and pieces of this, I guess, because like I said, of the TSC, there's a lot of knowledge and research out there about that. Not really, and also not having be kind of always in, like, I don't want to say crisis, but very absorbed in the here and now and not kind of thinking outside, like what else could be contributing to whatever issue is going on. Yeah. So
with TSC, the genetics are not modifiable, meaning there's not a lot you can
go
do
back
to improve that expression and the impact on health. So what I specialize in as one of the services I offer is nutrigenomics, which is targeting modifiable genetic mutations like MTHFR.
So whatever you can.
With supplementation or dietary restrictions or, adjustments. So there are some that are modifiable. There are some that are not.
Okay.
So I know it gets confusing for people.
It's a lot of information, but I love it. And I'm sure it's helpful for our listeners and me personally getting to know about this. So, okay. So, tell me a little bit about, starting using cannabis with your daughter and how was that difficult? Was she on any meds?
Well, thankfully, because I had already experienced cannabis myself, I was very comfortable with it. I was comfortable with its safety profile. It's never killed anybody ever in over 5,000 years of historical use. I was comfortable with the effects. I had seen stories of other parents utilizing it, and there's even videos of parents who are showing a child with autism in a full-on rage, and they're beating themselves up, and they give them a hit off of a vape device, and within just a couple of minutes they're calm and they're happy and they're sitting in their rocking chair and at peace.
Okay.
So I had seen those stories as well and thought, wow, instead of the mental health pharmaceuticals, which they have a lot of terrible side effects.
Oh gosh.
Some of them can even be permanent. If you start a child on something like Klonopin, they can suddenly develop tics and gait issues, and they're just so horrible for quality of life. They're so aggravating.
Yeah. And you're prescribed different ones for different organs, and no one's communicating about the cumulative long-term impact of that. No doctor to date has been able to give me the answers that I've been looking for on, you're giving me these 20 prescriptions that I have to give my kids daily. How is that going to play out long term? And I've already seen that. I can already see it. They're just barely hitting 20, one's over 20. And I can see, because I was on a lot of, psych meds, went through, like I mentioned, it was a lot of crisis, and I depended on alcohol and psych meds combined. And then when I got finally kind of stepped away from the medical, it wasn't working for me. And I knew enough about cannabis that I decided I would take a chance and kind of wean myself. Of course I did a lot of research, wean myself off. And it's like a different life I'm living in a lot of ways. Very challenging because I had used psych meds for so long. Like you have a different baseline. It's just kind of different. So, it's just my biggest, well, not biggest, one of my pet peeves is these psych meds that these kids with TSC are on long term with all the other things they're dealing with. If there's one thing we can hit at with cannabis and, take away a few meds, certainly there might be meds that they need to remain on. I don't know, but that's one of my motivations is the mental health piece. And, and then the mental health industry is so disconnected it's not integrated at all with the medical and, as you know, you well know. So it's like the Wild West in terms of figuring out how to get everybody to collaborate if it's possible at all, which, yeah, anyways.
Well, yeah, it's difficult. In mental health, the approach is you have these symptoms, they match the DMS profile, they label you with something, they throw you on a medication that they think might help. There's no objective lab testing done to actually see what's happening with the neurotransmitters. Because mental health disorders are a physical chemical imbalance.
Preach.
It's not, yes, I will.
Please do. I've been at meetings where I've said, okay, you can apply that label to her, but fundamentally she has TSC. This is a organic, part of her body has got these tumors all over it. And you can't tell me that's not contributing to her mental health.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so the approach is not scientific.
Yeah.
And
that makes sense.
Oftentimes I have seen where they'll try a medication on somebody, and because they're not taking a scientific or objective lab approach, they chose the wrong one and actually made the problem worse. I see that a lot.
Or they add on another med.
Exactly. And this is my theory behind all the school shootings. Here we go on a tangent.
Totally cool.
Every school shooter has been on a mental health medication.
Yeah, I think I remember noting that.
If you boost somebody's serotonin too much, they become extremely aggressive. Some of the medication side effects are apathy, which means they don't care about anything or anybody, and suicidal ideations. Yep. These are known side effects of these medications that the school shooters have been on, every single one of them. Wow. So we're making the problem worse with some of these pharmaceuticals and this approach where, and as far as, you said you can't get answers from your doctor about the long-term effects of the mental health meds. That's because they haven't been researched.
Right.
There's
not like
zero
cannabis
research.
That's been around
and the effects
forever.
we do know are bad enough. Look up extrapyramidal symptoms.
I know what that is, actually.
Yeah.
That's like,
they're awful.
What is it? Heavy duty, antipsychotics. I know that's.
Yes. Where you get gait issues, you walk like a robot, you get facial tics, I've seen a tic where somebody was constantly licking their lips. Body tics. It's miserable. And on some of these medications, somebody will start a med, get that side effect, stop the medication right away, but the side effect is permanent.
Oh man, yes.
So they're extremely high risk. And as a nurse, my approach has always been, with my daughter, with myself, with my patients, we're supposed to weigh the risk versus benefit of all of the options and guide our patient to make an informed decision. And obviously, ideally they would choose the least risky options with the most potential benefits. And I have seen I've worked with thousands of patients directly, individually. And it's so commonplace for patients to reduce their reliance on pharmaceuticals once they start cannabis therapy and really improve their quality of life. In the elderly population, I've seen reversals of dementia.
Really?
In the autism population, I've seen improved behavior, improved quality of life, improved function.
Wow. So
because cannabis is providing balance to all three of those systems that are out of balance in autism. The gut, the brain,
the endocannabinoid system.
And the neurosystem. Yes. And as far as mental health, there's also a huge link there with the gut and the brain connection. And there's a diet called gut and psychology syndrome, or GAPS diet, that's actually reversing things like schizophrenia, bipolar, borderline. Just by healing the gut, you can actually help provide better balance to the brain. So there's ways to address this that are far more targeted towards those contributors to the imbalances than the mental health meds. Mm-hmm. It's the take home.
Wow. But we're not being given the full range of choices for multiple reasons.
Not by mainstream physicians, typically not. Mm-hmm. If you get into integrative physicians or functional doctors,
functional medicine,
or naturopaths, osteopaths, they're often more, better educated about the alternatives to pharmaceuticals, where the mainstream MDs are typically pharmaceutical driven and they're not thinking outside of that box typically.
Yeah, that's a gridlock that it's going to take some momentum to change.
Well, there's so much profit.
You think that's the root of it?
There's a huge profit entanglement with pharmaceuticals. they're protected by politicians that they're paying off. Robert F. Kennedy just spoke about this recently, and it's not a direct quote because I don't have it in front of me, but he basically said, pharma owns our Congress. They are the primary contributors via lobbyists for Congress, and they represent more than double of the next leading industry, which is oil and gas.
Unbelievable. But believable.
It's a huge problem. And
yeah.
so the pharmaceuticals are being, and just this dichotomy of allowing pharmaceuticals freely throughout our country that are killing people every day. Great example is opioids.
Mm-hmm.
While just restricting so stringently the access to cannabis therapy, which we know is safe and effective and probably the number one alternative to all pharmaceuticals. And cannabis has the ability to actually address those underlying imbalances causing the symptoms. And in pharmaceuticals, the only curative pharmaceutical I can think of off the top of my head would be like antibiotics. 99% of them are just like a Band-Aid on an infected sore. That sore underneath is going to continue getting worse, and you have to pile on more pharmaceuticals to address it. So it's not doing anybody. I understand sometimes they're a necessary evil, but it should not be the primary.
Absolutely. Agreed.
Go-to intervention, because especially when you're weighing that risk and benefit, they're usually the higher risk and the lesser benefit. So.
Yeah, and I think it's parents like that are going to speak up, because we're the ones watching our children, our loved ones, kind of like deteriorate right in front of our eyes because of these medications, not necessarily the actual condition with which they're diagnosed, at certain times. It's the meds. It's just to kind of tie it in with your daughter. So you had a lot of success with the cannabis. And now I think I heard you in your other podcast, talking about making renovations in your home. So it's conducive to her, her being there long term. And as far as like any kind of self-injurious type stuff or behaviors, it's ready. Okay.
Yes, I have a home that's basically bulletproof for behaviors. And so, to put it in perspective, yes, my daughter is doing much better. Mm-hmm. But she still has areas of profound challenge, and she still requires constant care. Mm-hmm. But I'll tell you a little bit about where she was and where she's at now, so that gives it some frame of reference. So upon diagnosis, she was nonverbal. She continued to be very nonverbal to limited verbal until age 10. Wow. Now at age 17, since the cannabis, and that was on full biomed the first decade or so.
On full biomed.
Since starting the cannabis therapy till now, she is speaking spontaneously. We are having conversations back and forth for the first time in her life.
Oh my gosh.
So that was the cannabis and the nutrigenomics combined, I believe. In second grade. And so she's intelligent. At age 4 or 5, I left my computer open and caught her on my computer, Googling water slides and roller coasters.
So they're all in there. I feel, yes. I hear you. My daughter, she's taught herself languages. Really struggles with integrating into society because of,
Mm-hmm. So there's these gaps in her skills, but the local school districts here really are not autism focused. We don't even have a BCBA on staff in our school system in this county. And I don't think most of the counties in Oregon. I think there's maybe in Portland, but not here. And so they really didn't know how to teach her, and they couldn't figure out how to teach her. So that turned out a label in second grade of intellectual disability. I believe it was ID or mental retardation. They tried to put her in a classroom that had no academic focus. That was when my homeschooling journey with her began. When she went into crisis, we hadn't made much progress. And of course, the crisis years academically were really difficult to get her to try to do schoolwork.
Of course, yes. But my son was the same. Couldn't learn until his behaviors kind of came down.
Yeah. Since being on the cannabis, she has been completing 2 grades or more here in school. Now as a senior, she's doing, algebra and geometry, and she's on track to get either a diploma or a GED.
Oh my gosh, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
That's huge.
So this has all been post-crisis. She just has had this explosion in her improvement post-crisis since being on the cannabis therapy, and since figuring out, how to mitigate some of those genetic mutation contributors to her.
So it's been a holistic type program,
Mm-hmm.
but the cannabis has played a huge role.
Yes. But the crisis itself destroyed our home, as I talked about earlier.
Yes.
And so we did a $30,000 remodel on the home. The walls are literally 1-inch plywood with beadboard over the top. I mean, it looks like a normal home if you walk in, which is nice.
Yeah.
Tempered glass windows, unbreakable windows,
Okay.
6-foot fence around the whole property. It's like Fort Knox. So this home has been set up in a way where I want it to be a resource for other kids who are in this situation.
Okay.
Also with my daughter coming into adulthood, you know, I'm ready to start backing away from being that primary caregiver now that she's stabilized and bring more influences into her life. And so it just makes sense to turn this into a care home, bring in a couple of roommates and turn it into a new model of care home in the state of Oregon where we're integrating cannabis therapy. Thankfully, we already have a law in place here where nurses are allowed to administer cannabis in the residential care home setting.
Are they?
So that's really helpful. And I also want to bring in that ABA piece because that was another factor that was so huge for her when she was in that crisis, figuring out her motivations, figuring out how to teach her to be motivated to not behave and to communicate instead. And,
that's
you know, like
the only
I said
thing
earlier,
that worked with my daughter, I'd say consistently, and unfortunately it wasn't consistent. So, but behavioral therapy, really that's what works best for her. That's how she learns.
Yes, it's huge. It's really giving a positive spin to the whole situation as well, because you're positively motivating that child to do better and to communicate with words or sign language or PECs or, you know, augmented communication or whatever it is that we've offered them instead of the behavior.
Yes.
And so the new model I'm putting together, you know, we have kids in crisis here. The system right now is just every parent's nightmare. They're basically responding with, you know, the kids will end up in the ER for weeks at a time because there's no place for them to go. They're responding to kids in crisis with physical restraints. They're not training the caregivers. And so I really want to turn it on its head and have a place for these kids to go, be weaned off of the pharmaceuticals with med washing, stabilized on the cannabis therapy, given a full ABA assessment with a behavior plan that's taught to the caregivers so that we're setting it up for success. Because right now they're taking multiple kids in crisis, throwing them all in a home together, and when the roof explodes, they're like, oh, I don't know why that happened. It's like, come on, guys. Think.
Exactly.
So I want to show them.
You want to show them it can work.
The same funding. I mean,
ABA so the funding, how are you gonna pull that off?
ABA is mandated for autism in the state of Oregon for the insurance companies to cover it. So that's easy.
Okay.
They're already spending more than this would cost to figure these kids out and hospitalize them and have them go from home to home to home to home to home. So it's an answer that's going to be in the best interest of everybody involved. You know, with the physical restraints. Yeah, the physical restraints, we have kids that have been hurt. We have kids not in Oregon, but in other states that have actually been killed. So this is not the answer. They're responding in a reactive way. They're responding to the crisis. They weren't prepared for it. So I'm trying to show them there's a way to prepare for it. Perfect. There's a way to improve the scenario for everybody. And my hope is to turn this home and then have it be the model for additional homes moving forward.
Cool.
I love your idea about just having a big property and doing a community too. So
that's where Adriana, my coworker, I do social media work for her, and that's her vision. And she quit her Wall Street job. She's a kid with TSC, severely affected, and she pretty much knew what was ahead and was like, this is not okay for my son. I'm going to take the chance that I can figure this out. She's found the people to help her set up, or she's also very knowledgeable, a nonprofit with for-profit. So there's going to be businesses that will employ the population that we look to serve and, you know, kind of integrate. They can generate income. They can work to have a paycheck. They can, you know, like a wraparound model. So we are like right in the kind of the startup part of that. So I'm so thrilled to hear that you're doing that, and I want to know how it goes. And so
keep me posted on yours as well.
Absolutely.
I would love to see if there's a way we could all collaborate. And you know, being in legal cannabis states is so huge because, as we know, cannabis is not yet covered by insurance.
Right. And that's something that I've
mm-hmm.
talked with the people that I'm working with about how we could get people in the cannabis industry and insurance providers to somehow fund, I'm sure it's already been thought of a million times, but fund some kind of a program where, you're working with a dispensary and they're working with a grower and you've got some kind of a protocol, though I know it has to be super individualized.
It's interesting because I actually have a little tiny grow. I grow for myself and my daughter in the garage of this home. I'm going to have to remove it to turn this into a care home.
Okay.
But thankfully, I've already I spoke about this plan on stage at the Cannabis Science Conference last month, and I already have a lot of cannabis industry services reaching out saying, how can we help? I've already got some offers for donated product, for example. So I just think that piece is going to kind of take care of itself.
Okay. That's good to know.
My hope.
And
if I have to, I'll move to a property and grow it myself for the model. So.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. And how much stigma and how much struggle have you had in, I guess Oregon's pretty progressive with like other parents, just in general, other, educators with what you're doing. Like, okay, well, it's something that's really never been done before. I can imagine there's skepticism maybe.
Oh yeah. And there always is. I mean, the stigma is so profound
I know.
And I've had a lot of personal loss due to that stigma.
Me too.
So, I mean, my father he was a minister and a prison guard.
Oh, wow. Interesting combo.
Before retiring. And so obviously there was not a lot of wiggle room in that paradigm. And once he learned that I was using cannabis to heal my own self, I was basically disowned.
Oh my goodness.
And my mom is a nurse, and I showed her the research, and I told her it was making me more functional. It gave me my brain back, and I was showing her the research that explained why, and it wasn't helpful.
Really?
So,
that's rough.
But what that taught me is that if somebody is not willing to look deeper,
ready.
You can't make them.
You can't. Yep.
I can't. So I don't.
Some similar things with my family.
Yeah. So I don't waste my time on those that are not ready to hear it. I usually at least plant the seed just by even telling them I'm a cannabis nurse or explaining a little. I've planted a seed.
Yep.
And whether that seed blooms is up to them. And there's so many people that are seeking information about cannabis for their health. What can it do for me? How do I utilize it for my condition? That's what I focus on, are those that are actively seeking this information.
Because they're ready. They're ready to.
And I don't worry about the haters.
No, I agree. I kind of had the same approach. I wish people well, and, I have to let it go because ultimately what's most important to me is I have to stay healthy. I've got kids that depend on me long term and need a lot of help. And then, they're whatever it is that's going to keep them alive, and then because sometimes it comes down to, there's life-threatening things that could go wrong. It's, what kind of quality of life are they going to have? And that's a big piece of this, is these meds that they're on and just the long-term impact. So, I think that just even having these conversations is definitely opening doors and everything. So I'm hopeful. I wouldn't want to say I'm not hopeful, but it's a lot of upstream swimming, I would say.
Yes.
Changing mindsets and yeah.
Yeah. Are your kids suffering seizures?
They've had seizures. All three of them, well, two of them actually started having seizures again after long periods of not having them. And it was my daughter, it was after she moved out, and she was with a caregiver that was phenomenal, but there's a learning curve with TSC, and there was just not enough support given to her to help my daughter. It was more of she was supposed to take advantage of a lot of kind of navigate herself towards independence, and she wasn't ready. So it kind of backfired. And now she's going to a group home, and I love the team that's working with her for the transition into this group home. And in Massachusetts, it's pretty progressive with special ed, I would say, and these programs that we have, the social services, our Department of Developmental Services they're pretty good, for what they are. I think there's a lot of change that needs to happen, and there's a lot of real old ways of, old traditional, ridiculous bureaucracy, but overall, and, again, it's siloed. That's the biggest thing I found with having kids over 21 is, you're all of a sudden you're like you're the hub and there's nobody that's minding the farm, is the parent, or, you know, if it's the individual, it's a lot on a person that has a condition. That's tough. So you're fragmented. You're going here, you're going there, and nobody's talking to each other, and blah. So
yeah, it's hard.
But the group
your
home,
case manager and everything else
exactly
as a parent. So
yeah, it's tough. CBD, the explosion in the market, and what are your thoughts on, you know, the layperson kind of coming at CBD? Can you speak about that at all?
Yes.
Yeah.
Not all formulations of CBD are equal.
Okay.
Please do not buy your CBD at a gas station or a grocery store, for God's sakes. Please.
I've been tempted just to buy it and try it and see what it does. I'm like a human guinea pig, I swear.
Okay, so as a medical professional, let me get this out there that there are considerations of CBD if you have certain medical conditions, if you're taking certain pharmaceuticals, CBD could interact in a way that could be detrimental.
Yes.
So I actually, if you go to my website, Integrated Holistic Care, under the FAQ, there is a patient self-questionnaire, and it's questions you can answer yes or no to determine whether you should seek medical oversight before starting CBD.
Wow.
If you look at my other business, CannabisNurseApproved.com, we teach patients how to find medical grade cannabis therapy. And I don't benefit from commissions or the sales of any product.
Okay.
So I'm completely objective, and the Cannabis Nurse Approved program is based on, we call it our flow criteria. So we want it flower derived. So for CBD, if it says industrial hemp, don't buy it. You want flower derived. It's going to be much more potent. You're going to have a much broader spectrum of therapeutic compounds, and it's going to have less tendency to have toxic residuals.
Okay.
You want it lab tested. That's the L in flow.
Yep.
This is to verify potency and purity. You want it organic, obvious reasons. The W is for whole plant. This refers to products that are concentrating that flower as nature intended without removing or stripping away any of the 500 therapeutic compounds the flower can produce. And this is supported by research as being really optimal. You get better results at lower doses, and isolate and CO2 extractions, for example, have a bell curve effect. So as you're increasing the dose, it will peak, fall off, and stop working. So for instance, if you're a cancer patient and you've been guided to work up to pretty intense hundreds of milligrams a day sometimes of cannabinoids, you may be paying all this money for a CO2 or an isolate product and getting little to no benefit.
Wow.
Because you've bypassed that bell curve. So all of that is on the website. I have on my blog, I've got an article that explains this in detail with all of the research citations attached if someone wants to delve deeper.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And on the Cannabis Nurse Approved program, we also have a listing of a few suppliers that meet those criteria. It's a newer program, so we're still adding, but there's a few on there now. So
I guess that kind of leads me into your vision for your business, and what are your thoughts on that going forward? I know you're got a lot going on, but with the integrated holistic care and what you're doing in your home, how do you manage and juggle that?
So my business strategy is simple. It's been to follow patient needs. I started integrated holistic care because patients were in need of individualized and targeted information about their condition and what cannabis might do for them and which compounds. And so this is where I do the individual consulting with patients.
Okay. So a patient comes in and they make an appointment, and then you consult with them and figure out what types of.
Yes, I do a thorough background, history, diagnoses, symptoms. What are their targets? What's most important to them? As a holistic nurse, I also look at other factors like, dietary interventions or other lifestyle modifications, stress management, exercise that might be beneficial for their situation. So I do go beyond the cannabis therapy. We look at pharmaceutical interactions and teach how to work around those or other considerations of cannabis therapy that patient might have. And then we draw up a targeted care plan specifically for that patient and teach them how to proceed with their therapy. Beautiful. So it's patient education. And the reason I launched the Cannabis Nurse Approved program was because we would have patients call us, and sometimes they had already paid sometimes thousands of dollars for product that wasn't medical quality.
Wow.
And, this scenarios where they've got some concentrate from a friend of a friend. They don't know the strain. They don't know how it was made. There's no lab testing on it. That's a scary situation that could actually harm somebody.
Yeah.
So we got tired of saying, sorry, you wasted your money. I wish you had called us before you bought something. So our goal is to have an open source listing of suppliers that are medical quality by state.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
To address that issue that we've
Mm-hmm.
seen.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as the research into the different quality of products, that also came from patients. It came from working with different products and seeing different responses in my patients. That's what got me researching. What's the difference? Why is this important? Why is this doing this? Why is that doing that?
Wow. So you're collecting data at the same time. Yeah. Got it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm a grower myself. I've grown for about, 2014. So 5 years plus now. And I started off growing for my daughter and myself because I was sick and I wasn't working and I couldn't afford to buy products.
That was a question I had, is affordability.
Mm-hmm.
How do you, what are your recommendations on that? Because that's a huge piece of why I haven't really gotten too into using it with my kids. I can't afford it. I have to figure it out.
Yeah. Well, that's why I started growing for myself and my daughter. I started making our own products. And I had researched before I made products to see what was indicated for our situations. And it, and then I began growing for other patients and growing specific strains for their situation and making, topicals, edibles, concentrates, tinctures, depending on what their need was. And so I had all of that before I began consulting with patients. So now I can teach patients to grow on their own if that's something they're able to do. Oh,
yeah, that's great.
I have a lot of suppliers that are just so patient focused with their heart and their intentions. And if I have a patient that's really in a dire situation, I send them to that supplier and they will work with them on the price and, sometimes even offer free product. So I tend to work with people that have the same paradigm around, this work and that are patient focused versus just the profit focused. There are some of those companies as well. So.
Oh, I'm sure. That's just the way it is in this world.
Predominantly, I would almost say, unfortunately, but.
Yeah. Since I've dipped my toe into this, I'm pretty pleased with the people that have responded in terms of like their open-mindedness and, I don't set, I'm sure it's out there and I'll encounter it, but not so much. Yeah, kind of like you, like a philosophy of what's best for the individual and how can we make this work type philosophy. How can we improve the industry as a whole for the greater good and the most people?
And keeping it patient focused, making sure they understand medical quality. Pharmaceutical processing of cannabinoids is they're making it less effective.
Yeah,
pharmaceuticalizing it.
That's a tricky one though. I guess I've thought, well, if they can do that and they're helping people, that's kind of what I've heard from people that support that approach is it's the greater good. We can test it and put this out there and we can help millions of people as opposed to plugging away at the more individualized approach, which to me makes more sense, the individualized approach, but I can see it seems like big pharma holds the strings to when people are going to not only be more accepting, but it to be affordable because then it'll be covered by insurance and whatnot.
So here's the story of Epidiolex. This is the isolate CBD by GW Pharmaceuticals. It was approved by the FDA last year.
Yep.
So it's CBD isolate, which is not optimal. And in fact, one of the studies that's attached to my article talking about this subject and medical quality versus not, specifically looks at seizure response. Okay. And Epidiolex is indicated for seizures.
Yes. Lots of TSC people take it.
Isolate works less effectively and it also has that bell curve response. So what they found was that whole plant or, that nature concentrated cannabinoids and terpenes and all of those additions work just as well or better at 20 to 25% of the dose. Okay. So Epidiolex, the price tag on it is $32,500 a year at the starting dose. A whole plant custom blended tincture for seizures, which I have seen work wonders for dozens of patients of mine, starts at about $1,500 a year, and it works better. So they're not doing patients any favors. I understand what you're saying about, it's getting it
I'm
out
playing
there.
devil's advocate there because
They're helping it be accepted. I agree with that. But when it comes down to it, it's profit motivated. It's not in the best interest of patients. So that's where I'm drawing the line. I'm trying to really educate, like, don't go that direction. When you can go this direction, it's less expensive.
Making it more accessible.
And it's more effective. Yes. Well, I know that's a big challenge too. And
I think that's a big piece that scares people off. Well, if I have to grow this and do this, that's like a step that, I think has held me back in some ways. There was places I couldn't do it because of where I was living. But but I hear you, and I'm definitely on board with that. I feel the same way. A lot of the people I talk to are or have thus far. I mean, I've gotten a mix, but some people are definitely more like, okay, well, big pharma isn't the devil. We've got to work with big pharma. And then there's more that are in the camp of we've got to find the individualized patient approach. We've got to find workarounds and do it that way. So it seems like an ongoing challenge for those people who have had, like yourself, who have really done the work and educated yourself and have the documentation and the data and to back it up, as opposed to those who are just like want to remain ignorant until something's handed to them in pill form.
Right. So, and from my paradigm, I see cannabis as having the potential to revolutionize our broken healthcare system.
I'm right with you.
But the only way that is going to happen is if we keep it pure and keep it medical quality and keep it patient focused. Because if we go the pharma route, we're going to end up exactly where we are right now with pharmaceuticals that aren't effective. They're creating customers, not cures, and they're not in the best interest of patients. That's why I am so driven to try to educate and really bring people on board that are patient focused and really highlight those companies.
Okay.
Because I feel like it's that important. I feel like, we're at a crossroads right now. We're at a threshold where we have companies that are isolating and, fragmenting this plant, thinking that as humans we're wiser than nature and this plant that has evolved with us for thousands of years.
I know.
And we really don't know what we're doing yet. We're very much in our infancy in our knowledge of the cannabis plant and our research of the cannabis plant. And Dee Mary made a really good point. He spoke at CanMed a couple of years ago and said, we were studying cannabis for cancer and this 500 plus cannabinoid, terpene, essential fatty acid, antioxidant, chlorophyll profile. We removed one cannabinoid that didn't even have a name. It was this tiny, minute amount as far as the overall percentage. And when they removed that one cannabinoid, the effect on the cancer completely changed.
Wow.
And it stopped working. So this is where I'm saying, like, we're messing with stuff we don't yet understand, and we need to just trust in the perfection of nature and stop trying. I mean, the only motivation for pharmaceuticalizing it and isolating it is that then you can patent it and then you can make a bunch of money off it. You can't patent the cannabis plant, but you can patent specific compounds in the cannabis plant. So it's really not in the best interest of patients.
I see. You explained it very well.
Thank you.
Yeah. Tell me about your websites. What are the websites that people can go to find out more about your business and your work?
Sure. So my nonprofit in Oregon, which was my first business in this industry, is Integrated Holistic Care.
Okay.
And it's offering patient education services around cannabis therapy and nutrigenomics and other alternatives to pharmaceuticals. And then my newer business, which just launched a few months ago, is the Cannabis Nurse Approved program. And this is a program that is cannabisnurseapproved.com. It's highlighting producers and products that meet our stringent standards for medical grade quality.
You talked
and
about
so
that.
these are gold quality standards, whether you have cancer or autoimmune. Anytime a patient is trying to target a deeper goal versus that really superficial symptom management, you want medical grade products.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks so much for being on the podcast. And, I'll be in touch.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
All right. Take care. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Okay.